My mom disowned me for refusing to pay for my golden sister's wedding, so I took back the house she lived in, and what happened next shattered them. My mom, Karen, 62, female, has 2 kids, me, 42, female, and my younger sister, Rachel, 37, female. From the moment Rachel was born, it was like I didn't exist anymore. I don't mean to sound dramatic, but it's the truth. Rachel was born underweight and sickly, so naturally my mom was really protective of her. I get it, it must have been scary for her. But instead of Rachel just being the baby of the family, she became the only child that mattered to Karen. Rachel was this fragile little thing, and Mom treated her like a princess. Everything revolved around Rachel, her needs, her wants, her moods. For instance, Rachel didn't like eating on her own, so Mom would hand-feed her until she was well into middle school. If Rachel had a school project or homework, Mom would just do it for her. And if Rachel didn't feel like going to school, Mom would let her stay home, no questions asked. Meanwhile, there was me. I wasn't ignored per se. I had food, clothes, and the basic necessities, but emotionally, I was on my own. Mom never really took an interest in my life unless it had something to do with Rachel. One time, when I was about 10, I had a dentist appointment that Mom forgot about because she was busy at a spa. I ended up waiting outside school for hours until a family friend noticed me and gave me a ride home. When I got back, Mom acted like it wasn't a big deal. She just said, "Oh, I thought you'd figure it out." My dad, Michael, may he rest in peace, was the only one who really saw me. He worked a lot, so he wasn't home as much as I wished he was, but when he was, he made an effort. Dad and I would sneak out for ice cream runs or watch movies together when Karen and Rachel were busy. He'd slip me extra money for school trips or birthdays and tell me not to mention it to Mom. Looking back, I think he was trying to make up for how overlooked I felt. But as much as Dad tried, the favoritism was impossible to ignore. Rachel got the best of everything. If I wanted something, I had to work for it or save up. Rachel, she'd just ask and it would magically appear. One Christmas, I asked for a bike. Rachel asked for the same thing at the last minute. On Christmas morning, there was a shiny new bike under the tree for her. I got a pair of socks. When I asked why, Mom said, "You're older. You can save up and buy one yourself." It wasn't just material stuff, though. Karen was obsessed with Rachel's happiness. If Rachel had a minor issue, like a friend didn't text her back or she got a bad grade, Mom would jump into action to fix it. But if I was upset about something, I was told to stop being so dramatic or figure it out like an adult. I learned pretty quickly not to bother going to her for anything. Rachel soaked it all up, of course. Why wouldn't she? She was living the dream. She didn't have to lift a finger because Mom did everything for her. It got to the point where Rachel didn't even learn basic life skills. She didn't know how to cook, clean, or even manage her own schedule. Mom shielded her from everything, which made Rachel completely dependent on her. It wasn't until high school that I realized just how toxic the dynamic was. Rachel would cry to Mom about how hard her classes were, and Mom would do her assignments for her. When Rachel failed high school, Mom blamed the teachers, saying they didn't understand her unique needs. She even argued with the principal to get Rachel's grades changed. It didn't work, obviously, but it showed just how far Karen would go to protect Rachel from any kind of accountability. I, on the other hand, was expected to be independent. If I struggled in school, I had to figure it out on my own. If I wanted to do extracurriculars, I had to pay for them myself with babysitting money. And if I ever dared to complain, Karen would say, "You're the older sister, you need to set an example." By the time I graduated high school, I couldn't wait to leave. I got into a college in a different city, and I didn't look back. Moving away was the best decision I ever made. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't have to constantly compare myself to Rachel or fight for scraps of attention from Karen. I could just be me. Meanwhile, Rachel stayed home. She didn't move out until she got married at 26. Even then, Karen was still in her business. She'd call Rachel 5 times a day to check in. What did you eat? What are you wearing? How's your husband? It was ridiculous. Karen even showed up unannounced to clean Rachel's house or bring her groceries, even though Rachel and her husband were perfectly capable of doing those things themselves. As for me, I was living my life. I finished college, got a job, and started building a future for myself. Dad stayed in touch, calling me regularly and even visiting me when he could. Karen, not so much. She'd send the occasional text on my birthday or comment on my Facebook posts, but that was it. Honestly, I didn't care. I was happier without her constant criticism and favoritism weighing me down. Looking back, I think Karen's obsession with Rachel was about control. She wanted Rachel to need her forever, so she never let her grow up. Meanwhile, I was pushed out of the nest early, forced to fend for myself. It hurt at the time, but now I see it as a blessing. I learned how to stand on my own 2 feet, while Rachel became completely reliant on Karen. But even after I left, the dynamic never changed. Rachel was the golden child, Karen was her enabler, and I was the forgotten one. It's funny, well, not funny, haha, but funny in a sad way. How some things never change. 11 years ago, everything changed. Dad started coughing a lot, which at first didn't seem like a big deal. He chalked it up to allergies or maybe a cold that wouldn't go away. But weeks turned into months, and he didn't get better. In fact, he got worse. He was always tired, short of breath, and just not himself. Still, he kept working because that's the kind of man he was, hardworking, selfless, and always putting others first. Karen, my mom, barely seemed to notice. She was too busy with her usual routine, spa appointments, yoga classes, and whatever else filled her days. Rachel, my sister, was back living at home by then, after her first marriage fell apart. She wasn't working and didn't seem too concerned about Dad's health either. It was like they didn't want to deal with the inconvenience of acknowledging something was wrong. I was living in a different city at the time, building my career and trying to maintain some distance from all the family drama. Dad and I talked regularly, and I could tell something was off. During our calls. He sounded weaker, more tired. When I asked if he'd seen a doctor, he brushed it off, saying he was fine, but I knew he wasn't. Things came to a head when he finally went to the hospital after a particularly bad coughing fit. The diagnosis, a severe lung infection. I dropped everything and rushed home as soon as I found out. When I got there, I was horrified. Dad was lying in bed, looking so frail and sick, and yet he was alone. Karen and Rachel? They were out getting their nails done. When they got back, Karen acted surprised to see me. She even tried to hug me, but I wasn't having it. I asked her why she wasn't with Dad, and she gave me some excuse about needing to run errands. It was obvious they'd just come from the spa. They were both freshly manicured and carrying shopping bags. The hospital admitted Dad, and I stayed by his side as much as I could. Karen would drop by occasionally, but only for a few minutes at a time. Rachel. She barely showed up at all, claiming it was too hard for her to see him like that. Meanwhile, I was juggling everything, talking to doctors, managing his medication, and trying to keep him comfortable. I even slept in a chair by his bed most nights. Karen's lack of involvement was infuriating. She didn't work, so it's not like she was too busy to be there, but she acted like visiting the hospital was some massive inconvenience. I'll never forget the day she said, "He's in good hands with the nurses. What am I supposed to do, just sit there?" Yes, Karen, that's exactly what you're supposed to do, be there for your husband. After a week in the hospital, Dad was discharged. He still needed constant care, so we hired a nurse to help at home. Karen was supposed to step up and take on more responsibility, but she was as unreliable as ever. She'd forget to give him his meds on time, or she'd leave for hours to run errands and come back with shopping bags. One time, she was supposed to pick up an oxygen tank for him, but she decided to stop at the salon first. By the time she got home, I'd already had to arrange for someone else to deliver it. Rachel was no better. She claimed she couldn't handle seeing Dad in such a vulnerable state, so she just avoided him. She stayed in her room most of the time, scrolling through her phone or watching TV. At one point during one of Dad's worst episodes, she even went on vacation with her friends. She left me to handle everything on my own. I ended up quitting my job to take care of Dad full time. I didn't trust Karen or Rachel to do it, and honestly, I didn't want to leave him alone with them. He deserved better. I cooked his meals, helped him with his physical therapy, and made sure he had company so he wouldn't feel lonely. It was exhausting, but I loved him, and I'd do it all over again if I had to. Karen did try to put in more effort as Dad's condition worsened, but by then, it was too late. She'd sit by his side, but she'd be glued to her phone, posting on social media or chatting with Rachel. It was like she couldn't even give him her full attention. And Rachel, she only showed up when Karen guilted her into it, and even then she'd make excuses to leave after a few minutes. Dad passed away a few months later. He was surrounded by me, the nurse, and a couple of his friends who had come to say goodbye. Karen and Rachel? They weren't there. Karen had gone to some wellness retreat, and Rachel was out with friends. I called them both when it became clear that Dad didn't have much time left, but neither of them showed up. The funeral was a blur. I was heartbroken and exhausted, but I still had to deal with Karen and Rachel's nonsense. Karen spent most of the service talking to her friends about how unexpected Dad's death was, as if she hadn't been ignoring all the warning signs for months. Rachel cried loudly, making a big show of her grief, but it felt so fake. She hadn't cared when it mattered. A few weeks after the funeral, I got a call from Dad's lawyer about his will. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a small inheritance or a keepsake, but when I met with the lawyer, I was stunned. Dad had left everything to me, the house, his savings, his estate. Karen and Rachel got nothing. It broke my heart to think about how much pain Dad must have felt in his final months, knowing how little his wife and youngest daughter cared about him. Leaving everything to me was his way of saying he saw me, that he appreciated everything I did for him. But it also sparked a firestorm. Karen and Rachel were livid when they found out. Rachel actually screamed at the lawyer, saying it was impossible that Dad would do this to her. Karen called me, demanding that I share the inheritance with them. I refused. I cut off Karen and Rachel. It was necessary for my sanity. They were furious about the will, and their entitlement was exhausting. I moved back to the city where I was working, focused on rebuilding my life, and eventually met my husband. We got married, had a baby, and moved overseas for his job. It was a fresh start, and honestly, I didn't feel the need to inform Karen or Rachel about any of it. Fast forward a few years, and I gave birth to my daughter. Out of nowhere, Karen showed up at my house. I hadn't spoken to her in years, so to see her standing on my doorstep was a shock. She looked different, less polished, more tired. She apologized, cried, and said she wanted to be a part of my daughter's life. She even admitted that she regretted how she treated me growing up. She claimed she'd been living with guilt ever since Dad passed and just wanted to make amends. I'll be honest, I didn't trust her, but I decided to give her a chance. For a while, things were okay. Karen would video call to check on my daughter and occasionally send gifts. It felt normal for once. But then, as expected, the hints started. Karen would casually mention how she was struggling financially or how hard life had been for her since I took everything. I ignored it, thinking it would pass. About a month ago, Karen called me. She sounded excited, which immediately put me on edge because Karen doesn't just call unless she wants something. She started the conversation with small talk, asking about my daughter and my husband, which was already weird. Then she dropped the bomb. Rachel was getting married again. Now, if you remember from my earlier posts, Rachel's first marriage ended after about a year. She moved back in with Karen and never really got her life back on track. I hadn't spoken to Rachel in over a decade, so this news came out of nowhere. Karen went on and on about how much this wedding meant to Rachel, how it was a fresh start for her, and how happy it would make the family. I was polite, congratulated her, and figured that would be the end of it. But no, of course not. Karen then said something along the lines of, it's been really hard for Rachel to plan this wedding with her budget. She deserves a beautiful day after everything she's been through. I stayed quiet because I knew where this was going. Finally, she said it. I was hoping you could help out with the expenses. It's the least you can do considering everything your father left you. I was stunned. First of all, Rachel and I don't even talk. Second, how entitled do you have to be to ask someone to pay for a wedding you're not even invited to? Because yes, Karen made it clear that I wasn't on the guest list. When I pointed this out, Karen tried to backpedal, saying, we assumed you wouldn't want to travel with a baby, but of course you're welcome to come. You don't need an invite, it's your sister's wedding. I told her flat out, no, I wasn't paying for anything. She tried to guilt me, saying it was my responsibility as the elder sister to help Rachel. She even brought up Dad's inheritance, claiming that I was hoarding the family fortune while Rachel struggled. I reminded her that Rachel and I had no relationship, and if she wanted help, she could reach out herself. Predictably, Rachel never did. Karen didn't take no for an answer. Over the next few weeks, she bombarded me with texts and voicemails, all variations of the same argument. I was selfish, I didn't care about family, and I was letting Rachel down. She even said, if you don't help, it'll ruin Rachel's big day, and everyone will know it's your fault. The thing is, Karen and Rachel were acting like I owed them something. But where were they when I needed help? When Dad was sick, I was the one who dropped everything to care for him. I was the one who stayed by his side while they went on with their lives. And now, after years of silence, they expected me to swoop in and save the day? Absolutely not. Karen escalated things by claiming that Rachel had already booked the venue and paid deposits for the decorations, caterers, and musicians. She said canceling everything would humiliate the family because the invites had already gone out. I asked her how they'd planned all this if they couldn't afford it. Her response? We were counting on you. That was the final straw. I told Karen she could figure it out herself because I wasn't giving them a single penny. She started crying, saying that if I didn't help, she'd have no choice but to cut me out of her life. I laughed and said, you already treated me like I didn't exist, what's the difference? I hung up and blocked her. My husband supported my decision, but he did warn me that there might be backlash from extended family. He was right. A few relatives reached out, saying I should be the bigger person and help out because family is family. But where was all this concern when Karen and Rachel were treating me like garbage? I ignored them and stood my ground. Karen's final message to me was a voicemail where she said, if you can live with ruining your sister's wedding, then I guess you're not the person I thought you were. I haven't responded, and honestly, I don't plan to. I've spent too much of my life bending over backward for people who don't appreciate it. I'm done. After the wedding drama, I was done. Karen and Rachel had pushed me to my limit. I'd been letting them live rent-free in the house my dad left me for over 10 years. I guess part of me thought it was the easier option, I didn't want to deal with the drama of kicking them out, especially right after my dad died, but over the years I realized they had no gratitude, no respect for me, and no intention of ever being decent. Let's rewind a bit. When Dad's will was read, Karen and Rachel were livid that he left everything to me. Karen argued it was her house because she'd lived there for decades. Rachel threw a tantrum, screaming about how unfair it was, but the truth is, neither of them deserved a penny. Dad left me the house because he saw how much I cared for him in his final months, while they couldn't even bother to show up most of the time. It was his way of saying, I see you, and I appreciate you. Even after inheriting everything, I let them stay in the house. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd change. Karen continued to act like the house was hers, renting out one of the rooms to cover her personal expenses, and never once offering to pay me rent. Rachel treated me like a villain, spreading rumors among the extended family that I'd manipulated Dad into cutting her out of the will. They made no effort to mend the relationship, but they sure enjoyed living in a house they didn't pay for. Fast forward to now. After Karen's ridiculous request that I pay for Rachel's wedding and the endless manipulation attempts, I decided enough was enough. I called my lawyer and had an eviction notice drafted. When Karen received it, she lost her mind. She called me screaming, "You can't evict me. This is my home. I've lived here for 45 years. I calmly reminded her that the house was legally mine and that she had 30 days to vacate. Rachel, of course, jumped into the fray. She called me every name under the sun, accusing me of being heartless and greedy. According to her, I only cared for Dad to secure the inheritance. It was laughable. She was the one who barely visited Dad when he was dying, yet somehow I'm the bad guy. Karen tried every tactic to make me change my mind. First, she acted tough, saying, "I dare you to kick me out. I'm not going anywhere." Then she softened, claiming she was too old to start over and that the house was all she had left. She even cried about how she'd been renting out a room to make ends meet, as if that wasn't the same room I should have been collecting rent on for years. None of it worked. The final straw came when she tried to guilt-trip me by saying, "What would your dad think if he saw you throwing your mother out on the street?" I told her, "Dad left me the house for a reason. Maybe if you'd cared about him even half as much as you cared about spa appointments, he'd still be alive." I know that was harsh, but I was done sugarcoating things. Karen made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. Rachel didn't take the eviction well either. She told Karen to move in with her temporarily, but not without making a big show of it. She called every relative to brag about how she was stepping up for Karen, claiming she didn't need anything from me. It was all so performative, like she wanted a round of applause for doing the bare minimum. Karen moved out on the 26th day of the 30-day notice. I didn't even bother to show up. I hired a property manager to handle the handover. Once the house was empty, I had it cleaned and renovated. I decided to lease it out to a family friend's brother, someone I trusted. It felt good knowing the house would finally be used by people who appreciated it. Meanwhile, Rachel's big wedding plans fell apart. Since I refused to pay, she had to downgrade from a fancy lakeside venue to a town hall. Apparently, this caused a lot of embarrassment among their social circle, and Rachel's fiancé wasn't too happy about it either. It turns out he didn't even want a big wedding. Rachel had promised him she'd find a way to pay for it, which was clearly code for "my sister will pay." Not long after Karen moved in with Rachel, I started hearing whispers about trouble in paradise. Rachel's husband wasn't thrilled about having his mother-in-law as a permanent house guest. Karen, true to form, couldn't help but meddle in their lives. She'd criticize Rachel's cooking, comment on how Rachel's husband ran the household, and generally make herself a nuisance. A few relatives have tried to guilt-trip me into forgiving Karen and Rachel. They keep saying I've gone too far, that I should have let Karen stay in the house. But honestly, I don't care. These same people were silent when I was being mistreated, so their opinions mean nothing to me now. After Karen moved in with Rachel, I thought I'd finally have peace. I had the house leased out, focused on my family, and cut off most of the toxic relatives who tried to guilt-trip me into forgiving Karen and Rachel. For a while, I didn't hear anything from them, and honestly, I was relieved. But of course, that didn't last. About 2 months after the eviction, a mutual relative sent me a message asking if I'd heard what happened with Karen and Rachel. I hadn't, and to be honest, I wasn't sure I cared, but curiosity got the better of me, so I asked. What they told me was equal parts infuriating and, dare I say, satisfying. Apparently, Rachel's husband, Chris, had had enough of Karen's meddling and finally gave Rachel an ultimatum: either she goes or I go. Rachel was already on thin ice with him because of the wedding debacle. Remember how she'd promised him a grand wedding that I would supposedly fund? When that didn't happen, they had to settle for a small town hall ceremony, which embarrassed Rachel in front of her friends and his family. Chris had warned her not to overextend financially, but she didn't listen, and it caused a lot of tension in their relationship. With Karen living in their home, things only got worse. Karen would criticize Chris's cooking, his parenting style, they have a toddler, and even the way he spoke to Rachel. She would suggest how they should manage their finances, which was ironic considering her own financial mess. Chris tried to tolerate it for a while, but after one particularly nasty fight where Karen accused him of not being man enough to take care of his family, he told Rachel it was him or Karen. Rachel begged him to reconsider, but he stood his ground. Here's the kicker. Karen didn't leave quietly. When Rachel told her about Chris's ultimatum, she went ballistic. She accused Rachel of abandoning her just like everyone else and even threatened to cut Rachel out of her will. An empty threat, considering Karen has nothing to leave behind. This led to a huge argument between them, and Rachel, frustrated and likely embarrassed, told Karen to figure it out herself. So where did Karen go? To no one's surprise, she tried to reach out to me. She sent me an email. Yes, an email because I'd blocked her on everything else, asking if I would reconsider letting her move back into the house. She wrote about how life had been so cruel to her and how she had always done her best as a mother. She even tried to frame it as an opportunity for us to heal and rebuild our relationship. I didn't even bother responding. At this point, her manipulative tactics were just sad. After getting no response from me, Karen tried to guilt-trip some extended family members into taking her in. Most of them said no outright, probably because they've seen how she operates. One distant cousin agreed to let her stay temporarily, but Karen's stay lasted all of 3 weeks before she was asked to leave. The cousin apparently got tired of her demanding behavior and constant complaints. As for Rachel, she's now dealing with the fallout of her decisions. Chris didn't leave her, but their relationship is reportedly on very shaky ground. Between the wedding expenses, Karen's drama, and Rachel's refusal to take responsibility for anything, Chris has started pulling back emotionally and financially. He even suggested couples counseling, but Rachel has been telling everyone that he's the problem, not her. I also heard that Rachel has been venting to family about how unfair it is that I got everything from Dad. According to her, if I had just shared the inheritance, none of this would have happened. She conveniently leaves out the part where she and Karen ignored Dad during his final months and treated me like a villain for caring about him. It's always someone else's fault with them. Despite the drama on their end, I've been doing well. Leasing out the house was the best decision I ever made. The tenants are a wonderful family who genuinely love and respect the space. The rental income has given me financial security and allowed me to invest in my daughter's future. My husband and I are thriving in our careers, and we've started planning for a long overdue family vacation. As for Karen and Rachel, they've made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. Karen is still couch-hopping between relatives, and Rachel is stuck in a marriage that's on the verge of collapse. I don't wish them ill, I just don't care anymore. Their drama is no longer my problem, and that realization has been the most freeing thing of all. My wife moved in with a neighbor for a month to find her feelings. She thought I'd wait, but I made one move that turned her world upside down. My name's Mike. I'm 31, and until recently I thought I had my life figured out. I've always been a pretty simple guy, no wild ambitions, no crazy drama. I've got a steady job as a software developer, a decent house in a quiet neighborhood. And, until not too long ago, I thought I had a strong marriage with a woman I truly loved. Laura and I met about 8 years ago, and looking back, it feels like a lifetime ago. I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first job, and honestly pretty clueless about life. She was 22 and working as an assistant at a marketing agency while still figuring out her own career path. For the record, she never did, and ended up a stay-at-home wife. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those casual backyard setups where everyone's holding cheap paper plates and someone's always burning the burgers. She was the one who approached me, cracking some sarcastic joke about how I looked like I was strategizing my escape plan. I don't even remember my response, but she laughed, and somehow we ended up chatting for the rest of the evening. From that point on, things moved pretty fast. We started dating, and it felt like she added this spark to my otherwise dull and predictable life. Laura was adventurous and spontaneous, always planning last-minute road trips or dragging me to try some new restaurant she'd read about. Meanwhile, I was the grounded one. I'd be the one figuring out the budget, checking the weather, or double-checking the gas tank before we hit the road. It worked, or at least it felt like it did. We balanced each other out. She brought excitement into my world, and I gave her a sense of stability she said she hadn't had in past relationships. 3 years into dating, we decided to tie the knot. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. Neither of us came from wealthy families, so there was no giant ballroom or fancy catering, but it didn't matter. After the wedding, we started building a life together. We bought a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. Not the fanciest place, but it had potential. For the most part, things felt stable. I'd go to work, come home, and Laura would usually be in the kitchen or lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She'd tell me stories about her day. She worked in marketing back then, so there was always some drama with clients or co-workers, and I'd listen. That was our dynamic. She was the talker, the one with all the stories, and I was the listener. We didn't have kids, but that was a mutual decision. Laura wasn't in a rush, and honestly, neither was I. We both wanted to wait until we were more financially secure and ready for that next big step. It felt like we were on the same page about most things. Looking back, though, I wonder if I got too comfortable. It's easy to fall into routines, especially when life feels steady. I'd get up, go to work, come home, and repeat. We had our date nights, of course, usually dinner at one of our favorite spots or a movie. But I guess I stopped noticing the little things, like how Laura seemed to thrive on attention. It wasn't a bad thing, at least not at first. She's the kind of person who could light up a room, and people naturally gravitate toward her. I think I started taking that for granted, assuming her energy and warmth were just a constant part of our life together. At the time, though, I wasn't worried. I thought we were solid. Sure, we had our arguments now and then. What couple doesn't? Most of the time, it was over stupid things, like me forgetting to take the trash out, or her leaving her shoes all over the house. Nothing major. But there's this thing about relationships. They can look fine on the surface while cracks are quietly forming underneath. And if you're not paying attention, those cracks can spread until the whole foundation starts to crumble. I didn't see it coming, not then anyway. I thought we were building something strong, something that would last. But sometimes life has a way of showing you just how wrong you are. 2 years ago, our lives got a new character, Jake. Jake moved in next door, after the old neighbors, an older couple, downsized and moved to Florida. He was about 28 at the time, younger than most of the folks in the neighborhood. He was a personal trainer, fit, confident, and honestly a little too good-looking for his own good. He had that kind of physique that made people double take, like he just stepped out of an action movie. From the second he moved in, Jake was hard not to notice, not just because of how he looked, but because he was always outside doing something, washing his car, mowing the lawn, setting up a pull-up bar in his yard. There was always a reason for him to be shirtless. It didn't take long for him to become the talk of the neighborhood. Laura noticed him right away. How could she not? The first time we officially met Jake was when he came over to introduce himself while we were in the yard one Saturday morning. He was friendly, the kind of guy who could charm anyone. Laura struck up a conversation with him almost instantly, asking where he was from, what he did for work, and how he liked the area. I remember standing there, smiling and nodding, barely getting a word in while the two of them chatted like old friends. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Laura was outgoing. She talked to everyone. She'd be just as chatty with the mail carrier or the guy at the hardware store. It didn't occur to me that there was anything different about her interest in Jake. But looking back now, I can see the small shifts that started happening after that. It began with casual conversations. Whenever Jake was outside, Laura would find a reason to be outside too. At first it was little things, grabbing the mail, watering the plants, taking out the trash. But somehow, these quick tasks always turned into 10 or 15-minute chats with Jake. One time, I came home from work and found them talking in the driveway. Laura was holding a basket of laundry she'd been taking to the garage, and Jake was leaning casually against his car, laughing at something she said. When I walked up, they both turned to me, and Laura acted like it was no big deal. Jake was just telling me about his new gym equipment, she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. It didn't stop there. A couple of weeks later, Laura decided to bake cookies, something she hadn't done in months. I didn't think much of it until I saw her walking across the yard with a plate of cookies in hand. Just being neighborly, she said when I asked her about it. I shrugged it off. It wasn't unusual for Laura to do things like that. She'd brought brownies to other neighbors before, but then there was the time she bought a new set of workout clothes, bright, fitted leggings and a matching top, not the kind of thing she'd normally wear. I asked her about it, and she told me she was thinking about starting to jog again. You know, to get back in shape, she said. I didn't question it. Laura had gone through fitness phases before, where she'd get excited about working out for a month or two and then lose interest. But this time, her timing was convenient. You see, Jake jogged almost every morning. I'd see him out there, earbuds in, running laps around the block. And wouldn't you know it, Laura decided her new jogging routine would start at the exact same time Jake was out there. One morning I caught them chatting on the sidewalk when I was leaving for work. Laura was stretching, and Jake was showing her some kind of technique to avoid shin splints. I didn't say anything, just gave a small wave and drove off, but something about the scene stuck with me. It was around this time that I started noticing Laura's phone habits changing too. She'd always been glued to her phone, scrolling through social media, texting her friends, but now she seemed guarded. There were a couple of times I walked into the room, and she'd quickly lock her screen or flip her phone over, like she didn't want me to see it. One night, I noticed she was scrolling through Instagram, and when I glanced over, I saw Jake's name at the top of the screen. She quickly swiped past it, but I caught enough to know she was looking at his profile. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off. "I was just checking out his fitness posts," she said. "He's got some good workout tips." I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But the little things kept piling up. Another time, I was working in the garage when I heard laughter coming from the backyard. I stepped out to see Laura and Jake standing near the fence, laughing about something. Laura was holding a glass of iced tea, and Jake was gesturing animatedly as he told some kind of story. When Laura saw me, she waved, like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Jake was just telling me about this funny thing that happened at his gym," she said later when I asked her about it. "It was starting to feel weird. I don't want to sound paranoid, but you can tell when something's off." There was this new energy in the way Laura talked about Jake. She'd casually mention things he said or did, like Jake's thinking about getting a dog, or Jake recommended this great protein shake. It wasn't what she was saying, it was how she was saying it. And then there were the glances. You know the kind I mean. When we were outside and Jake happened to be around, I'd catch Laura stealing little looks in his direction. It was subtle, but once you start noticing it, you can't unsee it. At this point, I still hadn't said anything. Part of me didn't want to believe there was anything to worry about. I trusted Laura. We'd been together for years and I thought we had a good thing going. But another part of me, the part that couldn't ignore the pattern, was starting to wonder. I decided to keep quiet for now, but I started paying closer attention. If something was happening, I needed to see it for myself. It was a Saturday morning, and I remember it clearly because it started so damn normal. I woke up early, like I usually do, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the news on my phone. Laura was still in bed, which wasn't unusual. She liked her lazy mornings, especially on weekends. The house was quiet, just the sound of the coffee machine humming in the background, and for a moment, I actually felt relaxed. Funny how that works. You think everything's fine because you have no idea what's coming. Laura came into the kitchen about an hour later. She was in her pajamas, hair still messy from sleep, holding her phone in one hand and rubbing her eyes with the other. She sat across from me at the table, and I could tell something was up right away. She had this nervous energy about her, tapping her fingers on the table, glancing at her phone, like she was avoiding eye contact. "You okay?" I asked, setting my phone down. She nodded quickly, then shook her head. "Actually, no," she said, letting out a deep breath. "We need to talk." Now, anyone who's been in a relationship knows those 4 words rarely mean anything good. My stomach tightened, but I tried to play it cool. "All right," I said, leaning back in my chair. "What's going on?" Laura hesitated, her eyes darting around the room, like she was trying to find the right words. Finally, she looked at me and said, "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I think I have feelings for Jake." For a second, I thought I misheard her. "What?" I asked, leaning forward like getting closer would help the words make more sense. She bit her lip, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly, like she needed to get ahead of the backlash. "It just happened. I've been spending time with Jake, and I feel this connection, and now I'm confused." Confused. That word hit me harder than anything else. She didn't just say she felt guilty or that it was a mistake. She said she was confused, like this was some kind of dilemma she needed to figure out. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. My mind was racing. Was she saying she wanted to leave? Was she asking for a divorce? Was she trying to confess and move on? I couldn't tell, and that made it worse. "So, what does this mean?" I asked finally. "Are you saying you're done with us?" Laura shook her head quickly. "No, not necessarily," she said. I don't know what I want right now. I love you, Mike, I do, but I can't stop thinking about him, and I need to figure out what these feelings mean." I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. We'd been together for years, built a life together, and now she was telling me she wasn't sure if she wanted to be with me anymore. It was surreal. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "So, what are you saying? You want to take a break?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Kind of," she said. "I need time to figure things out. I was thinking maybe I could take a month to spend some time with Jake and see if there's something real there. If it doesn't work out, then we can focus on us." I blinked, completely stunned by her audacity. "You're serious," I said, not even phrasing it as a question. Laura nodded, her eyes pleading. "I know it sounds crazy, but I don't want to throw away what we have without being sure. I don't want to live with regrets, regrets." That word stuck in my head like a splinter. She was talking about regrets, like she was the one risking everything, like my feelings were secondary to her figuring out her life. I sat there, staring at her, a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling under the surface. Part of me wanted to blow up, to tell her how selfish she was being. But another part of me, maybe the calmer, more calculating part, decided to stay quiet and let her dig her own hole. "All right," I said finally, leaning back in my chair. Laura blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Wait, really?" "Sure," I said, shrugging, like it was no big deal. "If you think that's what you need, go ahead." Her expression shifted, like she wasn't sure if I was being genuine or sarcastic. "I just think it's the best way to figure out where my heart is," she said cautiously. "Sure," I repeated. "Do what you need to do." Inside, I was already done. The second she said she wanted to spend a month with another man, my brain flipped a switch. But I didn't want to show my cards just yet. If she was willing to throw away our marriage for some fantasy with the neighbor, I wanted to see how far she'd take it. Laura let out a relieved sigh, like she'd just been granted permission to do something heroic. "Thank you," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I really believe it's the right thing for us." I pulled my hand away, standing up and grabbing my coffee mug. "Sure," I said again, my tone flat. "If that's what you need." She didn't say anything after that, just sat there, probably processing the fact that I wasn't arguing or putting up a fight. But inside, I was already making plans. Over the next few days, Laura started packing a small bag. She told me she'd be staying with Jake, and she made it sound so casual, like it was just another temporary arrangement. She didn't even seem to notice that I wasn't asking any questions or putting up any resistance. The day Laura left, the house felt different. Not empty, exactly, but quieter, like someone had turned the volume down on my life. I stood in the living room after she walked out, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and I just stared at the door. I thought I'd feel angry or heartbroken, but all I felt was this strange calm, like the weight of pretending everything was okay had finally lifted. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and just stood there, trying to process what had just happened. My wife, someone I'd been with for years, someone I thought I'd grow old with, had left to figure things out with the guy next door. If it weren't my life, I'd have thought it was some ridiculous TV drama. The first few days were strange. I started noticing the little things she'd left behind: her favorite mug on the kitchen counter, a pair of shoes near the door, a blanket tossed over the back of the couch. I thought about moving them, but then I decided to leave them where they were, not because I missed her, but because I didn't want to waste the energy. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to fill my time. I stayed late at the office, not because I needed to, but because I didn't want to go home to that empty house. When I wasn't working, I hit the gym hard. I hadn't been a regular gym goer before, but there was something satisfying about pushing myself physically, like I could sweat out all the frustration I was feeling. Friends started to notice something was off. A couple of them asked why Laura wasn't around, and I gave them vague answers. "She's staying with a friend for a bit," I said, trying to sound casual. I wasn't ready to get into the real story yet. My dad was the only person I told the truth to. I called him a few days after Laura left, and the first thing he said was, "What's wrong?" He's always been good at reading me, even over the phone. When I told him what happened, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Well, son, I hate to say it, but it sounds like you're better off without her." At first I wasn't sure how to respond. I'd expected him to be more upset or at least ask more questions. But then he said something that stuck with me. "If she doesn't know your worth, why should you wait around for her to figure it out?" He was right. I'd spent so much time trying to make sense of Laura's decision, trying to figure out where I went wrong, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I deserved. I wasn't just some option for her to come back to if her fling with Jake didn't work out. That night, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so happy in that picture, so sure of our future. But now, it just felt like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. By the end of the week, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for Laura to make her grand decision. I was going to make my own. The next day, I called a divorce lawyer. Sitting in that lawyer's office was surreal. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady, even though part of me still couldn't believe it was real. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding as I talked, and when I was done, he said, "You're well within your rights to file for divorce. This kind of situation falls under irreconcilable differences." Hearing those words made something click in my brain. Irreconcilable differences. That's what we'd become. Laura and I weren't on the same page anymore, and maybe we never had been. The lawyer walked me through the process, explaining what I needed to do and what to expect. By the time I left his office, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I was finally taking control of my own life. Back at home, I started taking small steps to prepare for the inevitable. I moved some money into a separate account, just in case things got messy later. I went through the house and started mentally dividing up what was mine and what was hers. I didn't touch her stuff yet. I figured I'd wait until things were official. But in my mind, I was already making plans for what the house would look like without her. The days turned into weeks, and I started getting used to the quiet. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. In fact, it felt kind of peaceful. I didn't have to deal with Laura's constant chatter or the little arguments over stupid things, like whose turn it was to do the dishes. Meanwhile, I started hearing things through the grapevine. A neighbor mentioned seeing Laura and Jake at the park together, looking cozy. Another one said they'd spotted them at a cafe downtown. I nodded and smiled, acting like it didn't bother me, but inside, I felt a mix of anger and pity. Anger because she'd thrown away everything we had for some fling with a guy who probably wouldn't stick around. Pity because I knew it wouldn't end well for her. Jake didn't strike me as the type to settle down, and Laura was going to find that out the hard way. By the third week, I'd stopped checking my phone for messages from Laura. I figured if she wanted to talk, she'd reach out, but I wasn't holding my breath. I was done waiting for her. One night, while I was cleaning out the garage, I found a box of old photos from when Laura and I first got together. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, remembering how happy we'd been back then. But then, I thought about all the little red flags I'd ignored over the years, all the times I'd put her needs ahead of mine without even realizing it. I closed the box and pushed it aside. I didn't need those memories. It was almost a full month to the day when Laura decided to make her grand return. I hadn't heard much from her during her little trial with Jake. The few texts she sent were vague at best. Hope you're doing okay, or we'll talk when I'm back. She didn't even try to give me updates, or pretend she was torn about her decision. It was like she'd already written me off as Plan B. By this point, I'd stopped caring. I wasn't waiting by the door, hoping she'd come to her senses. I wasn't pacing the house, wondering what she and Jake were up to. I'd filed for divorce, and my lawyer had already started drafting the paperwork. As far as I was concerned, the marriage was over, but I didn't tell her that, not yet. When she walked through the door, it was like nothing had changed for her anyway. She had her bag slung over her shoulder, her hair perfectly styled, and this confident look on her face, like she'd just come back from a vacation and expected me to roll out the red carpet. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down by the door. "I'm back." I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, and barely looked up. "Welcome back," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She paused, like she was expecting more of a reaction. When I didn't jump up or ask her how it went, she walked over and sat on the arm of the couch. "We should talk," she said, her voice soft and careful. I muted the TV and turned to face her. "All right," I said, crossing my arms. "Talk." Laura smiled, the kind of smile she used when she was trying to smooth things over. "I've done a lot of thinking," she began, "and I've realized some things about myself, about us, about what I want." I just nodded, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, like she was about to deliver some heartfelt speech. "I care about you, Mike. I really do, and I think we can work through this. I think we can rebuild what we have. Rebuild." She said it like it was as simple as fixing a leaky faucet. I didn't say anything, just kept looking at her, letting her fill the silence. She seemed a little thrown off by my lack of response, but kept going. "Jake's a great guy," she said, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at how casually she brought him up. "But I realized he's not what I need. He's fun, sure, but he's immature. He doesn't have the stability that you have, and I think I was just caught up in the excitement of it all." There it was, her big revelation. She tried out the shiny new toy and decided she liked the old one better. "Uh-huh," I said, my voice calm. Laura blinked, like she was expecting more of a reaction. "I know I've hurt you," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. "But I really believe we can get past this. We've been through so much together, Mike. We have history. That's not something you just throw away." I let her finish, let her spill all her carefully rehearsed lines about love and forgiveness and starting fresh. Then, when she finally stopped talking, I stood up and walked over to the kitchen counter. I opened a drawer, pulled out the stack of divorce papers my lawyer had sent over, and set them on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her smile faltering. "Divorce papers," I said simply. Her face went pale. "You're kidding," she said, letting out a nervous laugh. "Nope," I said, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "I'm not kidding." For a moment, she just stared at the papers, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she looked up at me, her eyes wide. "You're divorcing me?" "Yeah," I said, my tone steady. "I'm not interested in being your second choice, Laura." Her expression shifted from shock to anger in an instant. "Second choice?" she snapped. "That's not what this is." I was confused, Mike. I needed time to figure things out, and in the process you decided to test the waters with another man, I said, keeping my voice calm. "You left. You walked out on our marriage, and now you're back because it didn't work out with him. Do you honestly think I'm just going to take you back like nothing happened?" Laura opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, her face turning red. "It's not like that," she said, her voice shaking. "I was trying to do the right thing. I didn't want to stay and resent you. I thought—" She trailed off, her eyes darting around the room. "You thought you could have it both ways," I finished for her. She stood up, crossing her arms. "You're making a mistake, Mike. We can fix this. I know we can." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't let it sway me. I'd already made up my mind. The rest of the conversation was a blur. She tried to argue, to guilt me into changing my mind. She brought up our history, our house, even the idea of starting a family someday. But none of it worked. Eventually, she stormed out of the house. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where she'd been, and felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, no second thoughts. Just relief. Later that night, I called my lawyer to let him know Laura had seen the papers. "How'd she take it?" he asked. "Not great," I said, smirking. "Do you want to give her time to process, or should we move forward?" "Move forward," I said without hesitation. It wasn't easy standing up to Laura like that, but in the end, it was the right thing to do. She treated me like an option, like I was just a backup plan in case her fling didn't pan out. And if she thought I was going to accept that, she clearly didn't know me as well as she thought. I knew she wouldn't give up easily. Laura wasn't the type to just walk away from a fight, especially not one where she felt like she was losing. I'd barely had time to sit down when my phone buzzed with a text from her. "This isn't over." I stared at the message for a second before locking my phone and tossing it on the couch. She was right, it wasn't over, not yet, but it would be soon enough. The next couple of days were eventful, to say the least. Laura showed up unannounced the following evening, banging on the door like she was trying to knock it down. "Mike, open the door," she yelled. I opened it, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want, Laura?" She pushed past me, storming into the living room like she still lived here. "We need to talk," she said, pacing back and forth. "You can't just file for divorce without giving me a chance to fix things." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "You had your chance," I said calmly. "You made your decision when you left." "That's not fair," she shot back, her voice rising. "I didn't leave to end our marriage. I left to figure things out, to make sure I wasn't making a mistake by staying." I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. "And in doing that, you proved you didn't value what we had. You don't test a marriage by running off to someone else, Laura. That's not how it works." She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes red with frustration. "I was confused," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know what I wanted, but I know now. I want us, Mike. I want to fix this." "Too late," I said, my tone firm. "You don't get to come back now just because things didn't work out with Jake." Her face twisted with anger, and she pointed a finger at me. "You're being petty," she snapped. "You're throwing away everything we built over one mistake." I shook my head, keeping my composure. "It wasn't just one mistake, Laura. It was a series of choices. You chose to flirt with Jake, you chose to prioritize your feelings for him over our marriage, and then you chose to leave. Those weren't accidents, they were decisions." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself, her shoulders slumping. For the first time, she looked defeated. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked quietly. I sighed, feeling a pang of pity for her, even after everything she'd done. "That's not my problem anymore," I said. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She stayed for another minute, looking like she wanted to say something else, but eventually, she just walked out without another word. The divorce process moved quickly after that. Laura tried to drag things out at first, probably hoping I'd change my mind. She even tried to play the victim with our mutual friends, telling them I was being cold and unforgiving. My dad, on the other hand, was fully on my side. When I updated him on the situation, he let out a low whistle. "She's got some nerve," he said. "But I'm proud of you, son. Standing your ground isn't easy, but it's the right thing to do." Laura's attempts to stall didn't get her very far. My lawyer was sharp, and the evidence of her leaving for Jake made things pretty straightforward. She tried to argue for spousal support, claiming she'd sacrificed her career for the marriage, but the judge didn't buy it. In the end, we reached a fair settlement. She got a small amount of money and some of the furniture she'd picked out, but I kept the house and the majority of my savings. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than I'd expected. The final hearing was bittersweet. Sitting in that courtroom, signing the papers that would officially end our marriage, felt surreal. I glanced over at Laura a couple of times. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. Her lawyer handed her a pen, and for a moment I thought she wasn't going to sign. But eventually she scribbled her name at the bottom of the page, sealing the deal. After the hearing, she approached me in the hallway. "Mike," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for everything." I looked at her, trying to see the person I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. but all I saw was someone I used to know. "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't fix this." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached out as if to hug me, but I stepped back. "Take care of yourself, Laura," I said, turning and walking away. Every now and then, I'd hear bits and pieces about Laura through the grapevine. Jake had apparently moved on to someone else not long after she came back to me. She was living with a relative now, trying to figure out her next steps, as one mutual friend put it. I didn't feel any satisfaction in hearing about her struggles, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. One day, I ran into her at the grocery store. We locked eyes for a brief moment, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. She gave me a small, awkward wave, but I just nodded and walked past her. There was nothing left to say. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled things. Laura thought she could have it both ways, that she could leave, explore her feelings for someone else, and come back to me when it didn't work out. But life doesn't work like that. I've learned a lot about myself through this process. I know now that I deserve someone who values me, someone who doesn't see me as a fallback option. And if that person is out there, great. If not, that's fine too. For now, I'm just focused on rebuilding my life on my terms. Laura's trial run with Jake may have been her idea of finding clarity, but for me, it was the wake-up call I didn't know I needed.